The Dead Sea is receding fast. Scientists and governments talk about canals and pipelines to replace the water that's being lost, but that's just the backdrop. Something out of the ordinary has been recorded in that biblical landscape. Not long ago, cameras caught fish swimming along the salty edges where, for millennia, almost nothing survived. Where there was silence and salt crusts, now there's movement. And it's not just the presence of life. The water has started to follow a path. It stopped bubbling up in isolated puddles and found direction, as if obeying an ancient call. Before we continue, go ahead and hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so every new episode reaches you right on time and you won't miss a thing on this journey. For anyone who knows the prophets, that image carries weight. In the book of Ezekiel, chapter 47, there's the vision of a river that doesn't spring from mountains or storms, but from God's own temple. A trickle that grows with every step becomes a current, and when it reaches the Dead Sea, it makes what was bitter drinkable. Wherever that water arrives, death retreats and life multiplies. Could these be signs of a beginning? Are we looking at the first shadow of that river? Before any answer, we need to go back to the text. The vision leads Ezekiel to the threshold of a temple that doesn't yet exist. From the sill, the water runs east. They measure 300, 600, 900 cubits. The ankles, the knees, the waist, until you can't cross anymore. The flow advances, heals the banks, and signals something that's still to come. Under the eastern gate, a trickle springs up and starts to run. It chooses the east, crosses the dry ground, heads toward the most arid places. A messenger leads Ezekiel along the bank and measures the channel that grows at every step. At 1,000 cubits, water at the ankles, another 1,000 at the knees, then at the waist, and then there's no way to cross, it's become a current. The guide explains, this water goes down to the Arabah and enters the salty sea. When it touches the sea, it makes it fresh. Wherever the river flows, everything that breathes finds life. Ez 47:8-9. The Hebrew word for life, hayah, speaks of more than surviving. It's being reanimated, restored, brought into wholeness. Where does this river come from? Not from rains or springs, but from the presence of God, from the temple, from the altar, the meeting point between heaven and earth. The text moves on and widens the scene. On the banks, trees sprout nonstop. Their leaves don't wither, their fruit doesn't fail. Ezekiel was told that the leaves are for healing. It's a picture of radical renewal, a world where what was dead starts to beat again. The bitter turns sweet and barren waters become a refuge for life. And even so, it all starts quietly, like an almost forgotten trickle. As it goes, that trickle becomes a river, and the river, a promise in motion, an invitation to look at the dry places and ask, what if the spring is already running, even if small, right under our feet? And now, as we turn our eyes to the land itself, to the sea of salt and silence, the question arises, is it really beginning? Could these be the first signs of Ezekiel's river? The Dead Sea has always lived up to its name. 10 times saltier than the ocean, it chokes almost everything it touches. No fish, no algae, no green strip along the shore. The ancient Greeks called it Lake Asphaltites because of the dark pitch that rose to the surface. In the scriptures, it symbolizes desolation and judgment. But something has started to move. In the early 2000s, researchers noticed strange changes around the shoreline. Sinkholes that hardly existed before began to open by the thousands. Only these holes weren't dry, many filled with fresh water. In some, the springs met the salt and formed brackish pools, fragile but active, where the balance between two worlds seemed possible. Before we continue, go ahead and hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so every new episode reaches you right on time, and you won't miss a thing on this journey. Then came the shock. In 2016, Israeli photographer and environmentalist Noam Bedin recorded something that surprised even geologists. Live fish swimming in those sinkholes just a few steps from the edge of the Dead Sea. And it wasn't a one-off. Similar reports showed up in other cavities, pointing to a quiet process still underway. What does this signal? What new chapter might open when fresh water insists on crossing the salt? New surges of fresh water started to appear on the western shore of the Dead Sea, especially south of Ein Gedi, the same spot Ezekiel mentions. These aren't stagnant puddles. The water runs, follows clear tracks, creates trickles that join into channels with measurable speed. The pattern repeats along the shore. It's not an isolated case. Geological surveys, satellite images, and field observations converge. There are several points where fresh water is actively entering the basin. In some zones, the water tables rise. In others, openings underground suggest fissures or aquifers feeding the flow. The hypotheses help, but they don't quite add up. The movement is recent, coordinated, and resists simple explanations. For those who cross-check data from the land with the prophecy, the question is direct and unsettling at the same time. Is the Dead Sea waking up? And if it is it doing so according to a larger design? If there's a pattern, it's worth looking for its marks. Because the presence of fish is a sign, but a course that takes shape, that gains direction and purpose, points to another order of event. It speaks not just of life, but of direction. In the next section, we'll follow these clues and watch where this water path wants to take us, and what it reveals about the old lake that seemed doomed to silence. A river is starting to take shape. The return of signs of life to the Dead Sea on its own already draws attention. But life without direction is one thing. Movement with direction is another. In Ezekiel's vision, the water doesn't come out of nowhere. It starts from a precise point, the temple, and runs east. With each stretch, it deepens by clear measures. Nothing random. There's a bed, a layout, a mission. What we see now echoes that design. It's not an isolated puddle, a stray fish, or a timid spring. There's a flow. The water doesn't rest, it moves forward. Studies carried out around Ein Gedi point to a steady increase in fresh water inflow in specific sectors. That inflow organizes itself like something clearing a path. It starts shallow, then gains volume as if following an ancient script. Up to the ankles, up to the knees, up to the waist. Faced with this, it would be easy to chalk up the fish as coincidence, and the sinkholes as terrain phenomena. But what unfolds suggests a different reading. When water finds a destination and persistence, it transforms what it touches. If this path continues, the Dead Sea stops being just a symbol of stagnation and starts to carry a story of passage. The question that remains then isn't whether there's life, but what kind of course is being born before our eyes, and how far it intends to go. Before we continue, go ahead and hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so every new episode reaches you right on time and you won't miss a thing on this journey. When the waters start moving in unison, they deepen and run toward the sea. Something in them recalls the architecture of prophecy. Then a question that won't go away arises. Is the Dead Sea being prepared for more than just the return of life? Could it be being prepared for a visitation? For a river that carries the presence of God? If this water is real and is following the path of Ezekiel's vision, we need to face the central question: where does it come from? The prophecy points to a direct connection with the temple. There, the river is born from a unique place, set apart for meeting with the divine. It doesn't spring from the ground. It doesn't come down from the clouds. It flows from the temple of the Lord. The Hebrew text is specific. The waters leave from under the threshold, toward the east, and flow from the altar, the heart of communion. This isn't natural drainage, but a sacred flow. If that's the case, we're looking at water touched by the presence of God, moving through the world to bring healing. And that leads us to another question that hovers over every account and every sign seen at the desert's edge. Is the temple being prepared right now, so the river will run again? And if it is, what will happen when those currents reach the salt of the Dead Sea and turn it into a living testimony? In Jerusalem for decades, a quiet movement has been advancing. Religious authorities gather garments, shape utensils, train priests, and care for a red heifer. The Temple Institute, the Sanhedrin, and other organizations keep rebuilding piece by piece what once stood on Mount Moriah. For some, it's all symbol, for others, inevitable. That's where the riddle thickens. If the temple is described as the source of a river and the Dead Sea shows signs of life, couldn't something have already begun? Maybe not the building, but the spiritual impulse, intention, preparation, readiness, might be enough to set the waters in motion. Ezekiel doesn't require a finished temple. He simply reports that the water starts to flow. Could we be in the first few meters of that course? The discussion reaches the map. Some argue the future temple doesn't need to occupy the traditional site. Others point farther north, near the ancient Gihon Spring, where waters once ran strong. That spring, they say, has increased its flow in recent years. Coincidence? A sign? The meeting of practice, prophecy, and topography is hard to ignore. Each piece, fabric, metal, rite, seems to pull another, as if land, memory, and expectation were lining up for something still out of sight. And what if the next step is already underway, right now, beneath our feet? In the pages of the Bible, God's presence makes way for the extraordinary. Fire before the rain, a cloud before the manna, the voice before the earth shakes. That rhythm shows up again and again. First God draws near, then the miracle is revealed. And what if what we're seeing now isn't just geology, coincidence, statistics? It could be the first breath from above. If the source of this river is spiritual, we need to look beyond faults and aquifers and ask what the Lord is bringing forth in the heart of His people. There's a pattern in small beginnings. God often moves in silence before the thunder, in seeds that come before the forest, in tiny steps that open trails. It was like that with the widow in 2 Kings 4. She had a single jar of oil. She heard the prophet's word, gathered jars, and started pouring. The flow didn't stop until every jar was full. It wasn't an abundance of resources, it was obedience that activated the miracle. What seemed little became more than enough. Before we continue, go ahead and hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so every new episode reaches you right on time and you won't miss a thing on this journey. Maybe today's signs feel subtle, almost easy to miss. Even so, they may be the start of something bigger. The invitation is to notice, respond, take the next step. Because as we pour out the little we have, heaven's river meets the ground, and a new current starts to gain strength. Look at John the Baptist, the voice that rose up in the desert. He didn't live in a palace, didn't flaunt glory. Even so, he was called to make a way. On the banks of the Jordan alone he spoke, and what he said crossed centuries. There's also the most unlikely beginning. A newborn lying in a manger, coming from obscurity and formed in simplicity. In him, God gave Himself completely, and through Him salvation entered the world. That's how the Lord usually works, without fanfare, with faith, not with monuments but with moments, quiet signs that carry eternal weight. That's why, when puddles show up near the Dead Sea, when fish move in regions thought to be barren, when a thin thread of water runs where everything used to be dust, the question isn't, is that enough? The question is this how it starts? The river in Ezekiel's vision didn't arrive as a flood. First, a trickle coming out from under the threshold, almost unnoticed. But step by step, as the prophet moved forward, the water rose, ankles, knees, waist. Suddenly it became a current impossible to cross, alive and uncontained. That's why a modest beginning shouldn't be despised. It prepares the ground, tests the heart, tunes the ear. When something small moves, it might be the sign that the tide is turning. Maybe what we're living through right now isn't a conclusion, but the opening of a book. If it's the first chapter, the next pages may exceed everything we know. So it's worth looking ahead. If these are only the beginnings, the horizon carries promises we haven't yet measured. And this expectation doesn't come out of nowhere. In Ezekiel's vision, a river crosses the wounded land and not only quenches thirst, it seals the high point of restoration. Where its waters touch, life multiplies. Schools of many kinds appear like those of the Great Sea, Ezekiel 47:9-10. On the banks, fruit trees sprout without ceasing. Their leaves don't wither, their fruit doesn't fail, month after month, 47:12. It's not just a flow of water, it's the reversal of death, an entire territory remade to be a sign of continuity. If so, what can we say about the Dead Sea, that stage of mineral silence? Could it be on the verge of a turning point we don't yet know how to name? Before we continue, go ahead and hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so every new episode reaches you right on time and you won't miss a thing on this journey. The signs are multiplying, pockets of life where there used to be salt and stillness, movements that draw patterns, hints of purpose in places that once had no map. Each trace works like a hint, like marking the page for what comes next. And what if these signs are just the prologue? What if the stream that starts to run today is setting the stage for something bigger, able to redraw what we used to call final? There are signs that start out subtle. Layers of the earth shift, springs show up where there used to be salt and silence. Geologists talk about processes. Maps change. The sand soaks up the water. But the story doesn't stop at the ground. There's another layer, made of ancient promises. Looking east along the stretch that surrounds the Dead Sea, a question grows. What if this trickle of water is the start of something bigger? If it's the beginning of the river seen by Ezekiel, its destiny isn't just to desalinate a lake, it's to touch the land, Israel, and the nations. The prophet spoke of waters that move forward and heal. Centuries later, in the last pages, Revelation 22 picks up the scene. A pure river, the water of life flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. On the bank, the tree of life, whose leaves are for the healing of the nations. The visions echo each other. What starts in the temple flows into the New Jerusalem, as if history followed a riverbed prepared from the beginning. So the question changes tone. Is what's emerging in the desert just a rare phenomenon or a sign? A sign that the ground is being prepared, that guarded words cross centuries, that what was marked by the curse can receive a new blessing. If that's true, we're not just looking at a geological change, we're standing at the threshold of a promise in motion. The river is still narrow, but it's already reorganizing paths, drawing life, changing routes. With every inch, the landscape responds, and step by step, the course widens, inviting us to look ahead, to where the water wants to go. There are moments when water carries something beyond salt and minerals. It carries signs. Given what's happening on the edges of the Dead Sea, a question rises that reaches us wherever we are. Are we looking at a geological oddity, a passing pulse of underground aquifers, a coincidence of climate and time? Or is there another story running under the surface? Fish show up where there used to be stagnation. Rivulets stitch themselves together like a path, and the parched ground seems to answer a call we can't see. Each scene pulls an ancient thread, as if picking up the echo of words written about 2,500 years ago. Ezekiel described a river that would flow out of the temple, go down to the lowest point on earth, and bring healing wherever it went. Today, at that same low point, signs of life are starting to appear. That alone already shifts our gaze. Maybe it's not just a story of hydrology and tectonic plates. Maybe it's an invitation, because when the land is restored, people often rise up too. And when God touches the natural world, it often mirrors what's happening inside. Springs opening up, banks widening, arid places starting to receive again. What's left for us is to go with this flow, paying attention to what the water says without words, and to what might be being born right in front of us. Look at what's in front of us. An event many would call a simple coincidence, but others recognize as a calling. I ask you, is this just a natural phenomenon, or the first drop of the river from heaven? Could we be witnessing in our own time another sign that the return of the Messiah is getting closer? Before we continue, go ahead and hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so every new episode reaches you right on time and you won't miss a thing on this journey. When we connect the pieces, ancient accounts, repeating patterns, movements in the Dead Sea, a picture emerges that's hard to ignore. I'm not talking about easy predictions, but about attention. The signs don't shout. They whisper to those who keep their eyes open and their hearts willing to listen. If something inside you woke up, treat that stir as an invitation. Stay awake, stay watchful, stay ready. You don't need complete answers right now. You need a stance. Keep following along because there are still things to be revealed, details that could change how we understand everything. And if this passage opened your vision a little more to what the prophecies have been pointing to, help carry it forward. Like this video, share it with those who've been distracted. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapters. In recent days, something at the Dead Sea has drawn attention. An unusual movement, quiet but persistent. For some, it's just another natural cycle. For others, a reminder that there are ancient stories running under the surface. Science records, measures, compares. Tradition, in turn, recalls promises and calls us to watchfulness. Between these two readings, a corridor of meaning opens up that nudges us to pay attention. And here comes the question that won't go away. Are we looking at a common event or the first drop of a river coming down from heaven? If it's more than it seems, we could be seeing, even in our time, signs that point to the return of the Messiah. This isn't alarmism, but sensitivity. Those who learn to recognize patterns know that signs rarely arrive with a bang. They usually whisper before speaking out loud. If this resonated with you, if it stirred something inside, it's time to stay awake, alert, and ready. Keep your eyes open, your heart receptive, and your mind focused. And if this message made something clearer in your sight, support it. Like and share so more people can notice the threads of prophecy weaving together in front of us. Subscribe to the channel to follow the unfolding, and above all, send this content to whoever needs to hear it. What's happening at the Dead Sea might be just the beginning. I'll wrap it up here for today, not the signs. If this woke something up in you, drop a like, share it with whoever needs it, and stick around. Thanks for being here. The next chapter is already on the way. See you next time. May God bless you.